Hello and welcome to another episode of the Warm Blanket podcast, where we embark on a journey to see what makes us feel good about Star Trek, where our love comes from, and what it means for us. In short, what is our warm blanket? My name is Gary, and I'm your host, and I'm very honored to welcome my very special guest today, who almost need no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm very lucky to welcome the actor, director, singer, and professional science geek who played in multiple productions like Innerspace, Gremlins, Golden Girls, Matinee, and Stargate, just to mention a few. Not For many, he is probably most well known as the holographic doctor from the little show called Star Trek Voyager. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a very welcome and a very special welcome to the one and only Mr. Robert Picardo. How are you, sir?
Very well, Gary. Thank you. Pleasure to talk to you. And it's nice to know that you're in Scotland, which is a country that I have spent quite a bit of time in the last 3 years and enjoyed myself tremendously.
That's good to know, and I hope one day you will be, once the whole situation sorted out, you will be able to come back and enjoy more of Scotland. So, before we go any further, I would like to talk about the elephant in the room, the 1985 Crystal Sugar commercial. How much did you have to practice your Italian in that one?
Well, I am. Although I do not speak very much Italian, I am of 100% Italian ancestry. All four of my grandparents emigrated from Italy in the around the end of the first decade and middle of the second decade of the 20th century. I have many relatives in Italy, and I've always had a good ear for the Italian accent because my father, when he was alive, was a businessman, and he had a furniture business in a very Italian-American neighborhood, and many of the people who shopped there were also immigrants. So I grew up hearing an Italian-inflected English, and I do a pretty good Italian accent. Now, why I was cast in that commercial years ago, playing a want-to-be Italian gigolo, wearing a toupee and lying about the house. Crystal Sugar, I believe, is only available in certain states, so I never saw the commercial on the East Coast when I lived there. They played in 3 or 4 states, somewhere in the Midwest or Pacific Northwest. I don't remember exactly. And I did 4 commercials for them. They were incredible fun to do them. I shot them all in one day, and somehow one of the 4 ended up on the internet. And I really wish the other 3 would as well, because they were all pretty funny.
No, they were awesome, and when recently I haven't seen them, I was like, oh my days, like how did I actually never seen them? And it's fantastic. That
Now, I
comes
should
to
say, before we leave that subject, there's a character that I do joke videos, an Italian gigolo, sort of an aging Italian gigolo character named Alfonso, where I do basically the same accent that I still do to this day. You can find little bits of Alfonso on my Instagram feed, and you will be seeing more of him lately. I'm sorry, in the near future, you'll see more and more of him, because during this lockdown, I've had someone ship to me my Alfonso wig and smoking jacket and the rest of his wardrobe, and I will be doing little Alfonso updates on Instagram. So I invite your audience to check out uh, at Robert_Picardo and see some more of me as this time a much older gigolo than the one in the Crystal Sugar commercial of 1985.
that's really good to know. So talking about acting, have you always wanted to be an actor?
No, I wanted to be a doctor. My childhood ambition was to go into medicine. I thought perhaps pediatrics. I think it was because I liked my childhood pediatrician so much, and I was inspired by him. So I went off to college and was a biology major for nearly 2 years. But theater is something I had done in high school for fun. I continued to do it at Yale as an undergraduate, and eventually I had kind of a quasi-professional experience at Yale, where we did a production of the Leonard Bernstein Mass, and Mr. Bernstein came to see it, was rather taken with my performance. He took much of our production, not all of it, but most of it, with some cast replacements, to premiere his work, a college production, to premiere his work in Vienna. And that's what got me interested in being a performer. So Leonard Bernstein was influential. Actually,
Mhm.
told my mother that he thought I should go into that I should be a performer, and that's what helped get me out of pre-med.
Mhm.
And I've never regretted um, being an actor. It's ironic, of course, that I played so many doctors, since that was my
Yes.
actual ambition. And perhaps it even helped a little bit to understand scientific reasoning, to handle all those long technobabble
Mhm.
speeches in Voyager, because Voyager's based in real science, and I think it actually helped me to have a bit of a science background. I certainly caught them when they made mistakes in the dialogue.
I was just about to ask how much your medical study helped with the character, but you just answered my question basically.
I did. I would call them on the phone and say, "This is not specifically correct." My line was something like, "The first cells to be attacked by the Borg nanoprobes are the patient's blood cells," and I said,
Mhm.
"Blood is a tissue, so you should really say the first tissue to be attacked by the Borg nanoprobes is the patient's blood," and they thought that was yeah. And they thought that sounded strange, but then they called me back and said, "You're right." So that's what we did. So little things like that, you know.
Mhm. But in
Uh,
retrospective, have you ever thought that what would have my life been if I'm a doctor?
I have many times. I have a number of friends who are doctors, close friends, and
Mhm.
I admire them. But I think I made the right decision personally. But I think it's a very admirable career.
Mm. So you played in two of my favorite movies. One of them is Innerspace, and the other one is Gremlins 2. Um, Both of them, you were fantastic, and I love the character in Innerspace. I think you played a very goofy, very goofy character there too. Where do you place these movies in your heart?
Inner Space is both movies, of course, are part of my long professional relationship with Joe Dante, a director whom I adore. He's been a great friend and supporter of mine since we did The Howling together. He saw me in my second Broadway show in my early 20s. I did two leads on Broadway,
Mhm.
one in a play called Gemini, and the second was a play called Tribute, and I played the son of the great actor Jack Lemmon. I had the second
Yeah.
lead in the show. I
Mhm.
believe Joe Dante was a particular Jack Lemmon fan. Joe is an amazing cinephile. He knows everything about movies. He came to see it, saw me as the young 24-year-old lead in that, and for some reason decided to audition me to play a werewolf uh,
Mhm.
in his movie The Howling, which I did. And even though that was quite a dramatic role, he got a sense of my sense of humor during, outtakes and bloopers. And I made a lot of jokes when we were, especially when I had the werewolf transformation makeup on. So then he continued to offer me parts in other movies. Probably the best role is the cowboy in Innerspace. It was a very small part, undefined, didn't have a lot of lines, so much of it is improvised. Many of the lines I made up,
Oh, really?
and Spielberg produced the movie, and Joe wanted to use me, but Spielberg felt the character had to be scary, not just funny. And Joe didn't. Joe wanted to fool Spielberg into thinking I was going to be scary, so we did kind of a scary audition that turned funny, and I was approved by Spielberg. And in the audition, I actually improvised some singing as the character, and that was funny enough that it I was told that I should sing in a scene in the movie. So that's why I'm humming. I'm an old cow hand,
Mhm.
because they thought that my improvised Middle Eastern accent saying the lyric "Yippee-i-oh chaye" was funny enough to be in the movie. So much of that part was made up.
Mhm.
Some of the Cowboys' classic lines are ad libs that I did, um, including uh, when I say to Meg Ryan, "Women love me, but you know that," and when I say as Martin Short's character impersonating the cowboy, the outlaw Yosi Bales, all of that stuff was made up. Um, So and Gremlins 2, by the way, has its 30th anniversary. This June 15th is the 30th anniversary of the release date of Gremlins 2, and they're
Mm,
having a big watch party on Sci-Fi Wire online. And
mhm.
I did an interview, a sort of a secret interview that you will see on June 15th,
Oh, that's
for
awesome.
the anniversary of Gremlins 2. That too was a very fun character. Both movies I wear big hair pieces in, and I'll let your audience in on a surprise. The character that I just mentioned that I do online, Alfonso, the aging gigolo, is the very same wig that I
Really?
wore in Gremlins 2 30 years ago. So the
Wow.
wig is, I just had it shipped out from New York to where I'm staying in California because Alfonso will ride again, and that means the Gremlins 2 wig will ride again this week.
Oh, wow. No, that's awesome. That's actually even makes it the character more both in Gremlins and both in Innerspace. The cowboy makes it more, I don't know, relevant and not relevant. Just makes it more original, knowing that it wasn't something that they gave you like, hey, this is the line you have to practice
Hmm.
them. And like you came off with it. You created that character from the ground up, basically.
Well, he was undefined where he was from, what he was. He had very few lines, as I said. So I would say that of my of the lines you hear in the movie, I'm going to just pull this number out of the air, but I would say 50% of the lines I have in the movie were in the script, and the other
Hmm.
50% are made up. So
Oh, wow.
that's a good number.
You mentioned playing with Jack Lemmon. I'm a huge fan, and Walter Matthau. They've been absolutely fantastic together. How was it playing with him?
Well, it was an extraordinary experience. Of course, it was the role that every young actor of my generation wanted to play on Broadway. Star Wars had just opened. Mark Hamill very much wanted to play the part that I
Hmm.
played in Tribute. Um, 10 or 12 years after I did the role, in my no, of course, what am I talking about? 16 years after I did the role,
Hmm.
I met Brent Spiner when I was just cast in Voyager, and I walked over to the set of Generations, and someone said, "Bob, have you met Brent Spiner?" And Brent Spiner turned to me and said, "You got my part in Tribute." He was joking. He was joking, of course, but he was also serious.
Hmm.
He was still smarting from the fact that he was a huge Jack Lemmon fan and wanted to play the son in Tribute.
Hmm.
Um, Brent got to work with Jack in
Out to sea.
Out to
Out to sea.
Sea. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a great role. If I could wish any experience on a young actor, it would be to spend the better part of a year working with Jack Lemmon on Broadway and
Hmm.
also in the Los Angeles production. He was extraordinarily gracious. When we had the first previews in Boston, we previewed in Boston and then Toronto and then went to Broadway. I got the best review from the most prestigious Boston critic, Elliot Norton,
Hmm.
reviewed the show, and he was the important Boston critic, and he gave me the best review of anyone in the show. And I thought, oh my God, maybe I'll be fired now because I'm working with a big star. And
Oh,
Jack
great.
came. I'll never forget it. He walked into the backstage of the theater the afternoon that the review came out, and he said, "Hey, kiddo, great review, well deserved, well deserved." And then we just went on. Then 2 weeks later, we opened in Toronto, and I got the worst review in the show. And I realized because I played a very contentious son to Jack Lemmon's very lovable Peter Pan like irresponsible dad.
Hmm.
He'd been an irresponsible father. I was the son of divorce, and he had been in and out of my young life many times,
Hmm.
but I was very hard on him. So I realized then that the critics saw the play either from the point of view of the irresponsible father who
Hmm.
was trying to make it up to his son, or the angry son who couldn't forgive his father for being a screw up. So depending on how you saw the play, whether you identified with the son or father. You either hated my character, or
Mm-hmm.
you might have loved Jack Lemmon's charm, but he was an irresponsible guy. So you saw the play depending on your own relationship, I think, with
Mm-hmm.
your father, or your own son, depending on what stage of life you're at. So
Yeah.
either way, I realized I couldn't listen to any of the critics. Or if you listen to one critic, you got to listen to all of them. If you listen to the
Yeah.
guy who loves you, you got to listen to the guy who hates you. So it was a good lesson to learn. So that was a great experience, and Mr. Lemmon and I remained friends throughout the rest of his life. And one of my sweetest I went to parties at his house. I met every major movie star of his generation through him, either at his
Wow.
house or backstage at the theater, at his dressing room. When I was invited always to come meet Kirk Douglas, Shirley MacLaine, Henry Fonda, you know,
Mm.
pretty amazing. It was an amazing experience. I went to parties at his house, and Frank Sinatra was there. So Fred Astaire. It was just an extraordinary life experience for someone in their mid-20s.
Mm-hmm.
And and I realized then that you can have enormous success in the industry and still remain a very kind and humble person. So I like to think that lesson made me appreciate all of the actors that I've worked with over the years who really are down to earth, and regardless of their success, are still regular people. Because Jack was the perfect role model of that. So
Hmm. That's awesome. Like you even gave a closer look to Jack Lemmon for me, which is an awesome thing. I mean, as I mentioned, I loved his work, especially the one with Walter Matthau. He was fantastic, and
the,
having carrying this legacy as well. That's really really awesome.
the last time I saw Jack, I was wearing my Star Trek doctor's uniform. Jack was on the lot at the stage right next to the same stage as the Voyager Bridge, right next to
Wow.
it. He was on the set of The Odd Couple 2, the
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
uh, the late career sequel,
Hmm.
when Jack was in his mid late 70s and Walter was, I think, 80.
Yeah.
And I went over and sat with Jack in his trailer for 10-15 minutes during a shooting break. And I also got to see Walter again, who remembered me as, Jack used to call me the Rotten Kid, because that was the character that I
Hmm.
played in the show. So I remember Jack saying, "Hey, Walter, look who's here, Bobby Picardo." And he goes, Bobby Picardo, where is he? Hey, how you doing? Because he had that way of talking that was very funny, like
Yeah.
this. You know.
Oh my.
Mhm.
Well, I'm just like I'm starstruck already.
Mhm. Well, you can look
um.
on the internet. You can find an image. If you search Robert Picardo, Jack Lemmon, and Walter Matthau, you'll get a black
Mhm.
and white picture of the three of us, with the four of us, with Jack's wife Felicia. So four
Okay,
of us in a picture.
I will dig it up for some
Hmm.
for somehow. So you mentioned singing, and I know that you made an audio CD that I actually own, and it's a
Hmm.
very funny one, Basic Bob. What was the
Hmm.
inspiration behind the Basic Bob?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I love to sing. It's what we
Mhm.
call a vanity CD. And I've always loved to write song parodies. In fact, I'll give a teaser for your audience. I will shortly be releasing on the internet another song parody. Look out for it, probably in a
Oh.
couple weeks. Um, I won't say any more about it, but I've always loved to do parodies. Um, and I was raising money. Uh, During the run of Voyager, I raised a significant amount of money for the Pediatric AIDS Foundation, which was a charity that I was very sympathetic towards. For a while, it was called the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation. Paul
Mhm.
Michael Glaser's now deceased wife contracted the AIDS virus from a blood transfusion,
Mhm.
and also, the charity was primarily for the young, obviously the youngest victims of the AIDS virus, because children that received it,
Mhm.
either uh, I suppose they could get it from blood transfusion, but it was much likelier that they had it transmitted to them,
Hmm.
during the embryonic stage before birth. So it was a great charity. It still exists, and for many years I raised money for them. Selling those CDs, I would donate. I believe it was 20% of the
Hmm.
sale price of the thing, and it was a self-produced, so I had invested the money to make the thing, and I would donate that money to the Pediatric AIDS Foundation. When I was on the Star Trek Weakest Link, and I came in
I
number
remember.
two, to LeVar Burton. Uh, I very nearly raised the 120,000 prize money for my charity, but LeVar got it for his charity. But I think the consolation prize was about 10,000 that went to the Pediatric AIDS
Wow.
Foundation. So anyway, so that's why I did the CDs. I ended up doing 3 or 4 of them. I used to sell them at conventions. Now, um, I see them on eBay for enormous amounts of money, and I still have them. I just got tired of taking them to conventions, but someday I guess they'll return because I see them on eBay for 60, 80, 100, sometimes $150. So rather than let people scalp it, I should bring them back. But that was my favorite one, and also I did a
Hmm.
reading of the book that I wrote, the Holograms Handbook,
Oh,
which was the indispensable guide, for holograms to deal with inferior organic beings, and that was great fun. And I did a reading of that. So those were my favorite of my 4 or 5 CDs, however many there were.
okay. So next time when you come to Edinburgh, please bring one or two, and I will be definitely queuing up to get one.
All right, okay.
So let's talk about Star Trek naturally.
Hmm.
So in many interviews in the past, you mentioned that your wife was a Trekkie before you even got into it. Have you ever imagined that the show will play such a significant part in in your life and that time?
No, I grew up. I've confessed this to the fans, so it's not new information. I did not grow up watching Star Trek. I watched Lost in Space. I remember because I think I had a big 14-year-old crush on Angela Cartwright. But I didn't watch Star Trek. I don't know
Hmm.
why. And even more, I guess, an even more humorous fact is that when Star Trek, the original series, came back in syndication in the early '70s, I had just graduated Yale, and I was rooming with 2 friends from Yale in an apartment while I was studying acting. And these 2 guys would come home from whatever their daytime jobs was. One was studying trombone at Juilliard. The other was, I think, about to go to law school, and he was getting a year of personal work experience.
Hmm.
And they would sit down at 4 o'clock every afternoon and watch Star Trek reruns, and I would ridicule them mercilessly as I walked through the living room, and they were both glued to the screen. So I think it's safe to say that those 2 guys got the last laugh on me because at that time I would never. I mean, I was a theater. I was studying acting in New York. Acting to me was working in the theater. I didn't even think ahead necessarily to
Hmm.
working in television, but I would never have imagined being in a Star Trek or other science fiction series at that stage of my life. And when the at the time of the audition, I had not seen a full Star Trek episode. I'd been seen some of the movies. I'd seen
Hmm.
the great Star Trek 4, the whale movie. I'd seen Star Trek 2, The Wrath of Khan, but I had not seen a complete episode of the original series or a complete episode of any of the Next Generation,
Hmm.
or at the time Deep Space Nine had been on 2 years. So I was pretty ignorant of Star Trek, and in retrospect, I'm glad because had I really wanted the job, it might have psyched me out to be a fan. Tim
Hmm.
Russ, to my knowledge, Tim Russ is the only bona fide Star Trek fan in the Voyager cast. Tim
Hmm.
loved the show, wanted the role, and went after it. And thank God he got it because he's just terrific in the show. And really, Tuvok is kind of I think he's the unsung hero of our cast. I really do. He gives such dignity to it. I mean,
Hmm.
I love, I mean, obviously our show would be nothing without Kate Mulgrew. She's our leader.
Yeah.
I think all the actors are great in our cast, but I particularly love Janeway and Seven of Nine. But among the male characters, Tuvok is to me the unsung hero of our cast. Great
Mm.
dignity, and the core. He's the essence of Star Trek in our cast, I think.
Wow. Well, thank you very much for this.
Hmm.
All right, so we arrived to a point in our little podcast where we have a game, and that called "Do Your Shat." This is the William Shatner Kirk, Mr. Captain Kirk impression game.
Okay. All
So
right.
you can pick anything. You can do Space the Final Frontier if you could do the best William Shatner Captain Kirk impression.
Uh, I'd rather do something else. I'm going to do the
Okay.
first two lines of a psalm. All right.
Okay.
The Lord is my shepherd; I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down. That's about all I can. I'm not much of a Shatner, but I that was the beginning of the 14th Psalm, read by Captain Kirk. I hope it went over well.
That was amazing. So, aside being an actor, you're a member of the Planetary Society, and you're a big science advocate. Have you always been interested about space and what the Planetary Society does, or is it really branched out from Voyager or Stargate?
I would say the latter. I would say that I've always been a science fan. Life sciences were my passion as a young man. Um, but when you're on a Star Trek series, you're put in this extraordinary situation where you get to meet these incredible people in space exploration, in engineering, um, uh, principal investigators of NASA missions. All of these people that look to uh, science fiction, perhaps
Mm-hmm.
depending on their age, they might have been inspired by Isaac Asimov or Ray Bradbury.
Mm-hmm.
But of a certain age, most of them were fans of Star Trek, many of them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and because of Star Trek, when I first got on Star Trek, I found myself sitting on a stage. We were celebrating the 30th anniversary of Star Trek in Huntsville, Alabama, and I was on stage with one of my colleagues, Robert Duncan McNeil, and five men who had walked on the moon, including Buzz Aldrin and Alan Shepard and Alan Bean and Dave Scott. And so here we are on stage with five astronauts who, who had the courage and and seized the moment, and had stepped on the moon's surface in the obviously the end of the 60s and
Mm-hmm.
through the mid 70s. And I realized at that time I can either find this awkward that me, a mere actor, am hanging out with these
Mm-hmm.
legends in space science and exploration, or I can embrace this opportunity and and talk to them, learn what I can from them, and take the particular access that Star Trek gives me to science fiction fans to help bring the message of real science and real space exploration to the sci-fi fan, to help them
Mm-hmm.
realize, if they're not already a fan of real exploration, to say to them, hey, if you're a science fiction fan, you're a science fan. And if you don't know that, have a look at this, have a look at this, have a look at this. And that became my early association with the Planetary Society when two of the surviving founders, Carl Sagan, sadly, we lost him way too young. He had passed away a few years before I became involved with this society that he co-founded with Louis Friedman and
Mm-hmm.
Bruce Murray. So Mr. Friedman and Mr. Murray, who were both colleagues from Jet Propulsion Laboratory, uh, asked me to be on the advisory council, which I did. I helped. I got the first public service announcement that was ever shot on a Star Trek set for a Planetary Society educational challenge that they were
Mm-hmm.
partners on, called the Mars Millennium Project. I was very active with their Red Rover project, where high school and junior high school kids could build their
Hmm.
own Mars rover. This was right after we had landed our very first rover, the Sojourner, on the Martian surface in 1997, I believe.
Hmm.
And kids could do an exact analog for that, build their own rover out of Legos, send their rover to a competing high school, and then their rover would explore the unknown Martian surface that the other high school had made, like a big Martian sandbox. And
Hmm.
meanwhile, the competing school would send their rover to your school, and they would explore your Martian surface, and they would
Hmm.
send the data back via the internet. It was a perfect analog for what NASA was really doing at that moment in time. And so I like to think that I was helping a new generation of people to get interested in STEM, science, technology,
Hmm.
uh, engineering and math. So
Hmm.
that was, and then about 3, 4 years ago, our present leader, Bill Nye, the Science Guy, who we'd been friends since we met at the 40th anniversary celebration of NASA in 1998
Wow.
in
A while
Washington
ago.
D.C. So Bill and I had been friends for a long time, and he was now the CEO and asked me to be on the executive board, and I have served on that board for about 4 years now, and it's a great group of people, and it's really a great. For those of you who don't know, I should have started out with this. The Planetary Society is a space advocacy group that seeks to empower the regular citizen to have a voice
Hmm.
in space exploration. So you join our membership, you can sign petitions, you will have all the up to date best bloggers with the best information. We're quoted all the time in national newspapers and magazines. We have the best experts on what's happening in space in our society. So you'll know everything that's happening, and you will be able to sign petitions and influence, not only our government, but hopefully other space capable governments in their future choices. It's also the Planetary Society uh, it crowd-funded a spacecraft, which is presently in orbit. It's called LightSail 2, and it is a solar sail spacecraft that was first imagined by Carl Sagan years ago, and we finally fulfilled his dream. Raised about $7 million on the internet. So
Hmm.
how many space organizations have a citizen-funded spacecraft? The answer is none other than the Planetary Society. So check us out at www.planetary.org and consider becoming a member.
Wow. Well, before I let you go, because I know we are kind of out of time now, um, being a science geek, being a singer, and also being a fan of Star Trek, and this is what this whole podcast is about, to find out what is our warm blanket. I always refer to Star Trek as my warm blanket because that comforts me when I need it the most. And I wonder, you now being the fan of the show and obviously playing in it, what is your warm blanket when you think about Star Trek?
Well, obviously, I see it from both the inside and the outside. I have learned, really, from listening to fans and meeting fans all over the world. I've learned how important Star Trek is to them. How, as you sort of indicated by calling it a warm blanket, what a comfort it's been to them, especially during periods of particular challenge in their life. I can't tell you how many fans have said, "Thank you, Star Trek helped save my life during a time when I was either very depressed, or I was suffering from addiction, or I just lost a family member, or I had cancer for the first time." There are just so many examples of people who credit the show that they like watching, and the stories that it tells, and the characters that it portrays, has given them inspiration and comfort and hope at a dark time in their lives. And that is really, I think, the best reward you could get as an actor, to feel that in some small way you've made the life better for people who enjoyed watching your work. and you're part of something bigger than yourself. So that I would say that from the inside, from being an actor, that is my warm blanket of Star Trek, is that it has such a devoted fan base, and that they care about the work, and they seem to care about me and my career and my life, just because I was part of something that is meaningful to them and continues to mean. And that Star Trek garners new fans all the time. I meet always at events people that were born after Voyager finished its run. Voyager finished its primetime run in the very beginning of 2001, and I'll meet fans that are 14, 16, 18 years old who have just watched the whole binge watched the whole series, and to them it's all brand new, and they're very excited to meet me and my castmates. So that's a great feeling, that the work lives on and that people constantly revisit it. And and uh, and and it's also nice to have a signature role as an actor. I've played many, many different characters. I've been on another science fiction franchise, as you said, Stargate,
Stargate.
and I love that experience. I wish it went on longer. I love the transformation of my character from basically a villain, sort of
A man in a
a
suit.
a man in a suit, who came in to evaluate other people's leadership and was always looking for the fall guy or the person who screwed up so that their head would roll,
Yes.
and then assumed the mantle of leadership himself after being the armchair quarterback that he was. And those producers, Brad Wright, Robert Cooper, and especially Joe Malazzi and Paul Muley, were very kind to me as a person. They loved what I brought to the character, and they were the easiest people to work for, because they were just so enthusiastic to have you aboard. So that was Stargate was a great experience, and my only regret is that I didn't get to play that character longer. But I've been very blessed to be part of two great science fiction franchises, and of course, The Doctor, because I did so much of it, is pretty much my signature role as an actor. And what's nice about that is he started, as basically a blank slate, and I got to grow before the audience's eyes over the course of 7 years into a pretty fully rounded human being, like artificial intelligence. So he had a great journey, and I never would have anticipated it when I got the role. I didn't see it, where it was going to go. I didn't get it at first, but as it became clear to me that I had lucked into, and not only a well-loved franchise, but I'd lucked into the plum role for a man in our cast. I am very grateful for that to this day, and surprised and delighted by a turn in my career I could never have anticipated.
No, that's such a beautiful note to, I think, end this conversation. And I know you have a busy schedule, and I'm honestly, I'm really glad that, and honored that you spared your precious time with me, and with my audience as well. Thank you very much again, Mr. Picardo. We'll hope to see you soon in one of the convention or out there. And with everyone who's listening, look out for Alfonso.
Look out for Alfonso, and also look out for a little song parody that will be coming your way that won't be about Star Trek specifically, but maybe about a Star Trek character you know and love, obliquely, shall we say. And it's been a pleasure talking to you. I hope to be back in Scotland soon. I dearly wish that I'm performing at the Edinburgh Festival again.
In the French Festival.
And yeah, I know this is obviously, of course, the first year where there will be no Fringe Festival since its inception, and all for good reason. But I pray for a time when we can all be together again, that we have a vaccine, and this is all a distant memory. And I pray for anyone who's lost a loved one, a family member, a friend, or even a friend of a friend to this terrible virus. My condolences to you, and I just hope that this very stressful and difficult time will be behind us individually and all of our countries very soon.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, again, thank you very much for being in the show, sir. And for my audience, thank you very much for listening to another Warm Blanket, the podcast where we are in a quest to find out what is our warm blanket about. Live long and prosper. And that was it for this episode. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and rest assured, new episodes will be coming out every week where we sit down with a Trekkie to find out what makes us feel good about Star Trek and to discover what is our warm blanket made of. If you really enjoy listening to this podcast, please leave a review on your favorite podcasting app. It will really mean a lot to me. To find out more about this audio adventure, please visit TREKKERPRISE.com/podcast, where you can also listen to the previous episodes. Thank you again for listening to yet another episode of the Warm Blanket Podcast, and I'll see you in the next episode. Live long and prosper.